The superhero industry is one of the most profitable in the world, and over the years, it has taken pop culture by storm. Stories like Superman's have captivated audiences, while Marvel's comics and films featuring superhero teams like the X-Men and the Avengers have dominated the spotlight. But what if the perfect hero, humanity's ultimate line of defense, wasn't actually a savior, but a threat? It all begins with the Mauler twins attacking the White House, only to be stopped by the Guardians of the Globe, a parody of the mighty Justice League. However, it's Omni-Man, the most powerful hero on Earth, who truly secures the day. And unsurprisingly, Omni-Man makes quick work of the Mauler twins. After this, we meet his son Mark, a regular human who, despite being Omni-Man's child, hasn't inherited his father's powers. This lack of abilities frustrates him deeply. That is, until one day when his powers finally awaken, though he struggles to control them at first. Now possessing abilities equal to his father's, Mark begins training under Omni-Man's guidance. However, from the very start, Omni-Man is tough on him, pushing him relentlessly to shape him into a true hero, which creates tension between father and son. All Mark wants is to follow in his father's footsteps, so he starts fighting crime. Eventually, the two reconcile, and Omni-Man takes Mark to meet his tailor, the man responsible for making superhero suits. Here, Mark gets his own costume and officially adopts the name Invincible. Despite his new identity, Mark still holds on to his humanity and fears he won't live up to his father's legacy. Meanwhile, the Guardians of the Globe receive a distress signal at their headquarters, where they are greeted by Omni-Man. However, the sense of security he exudes is quickly shattered when he turns on them, brutally killing the immortal before effortlessly eliminating the rest of the team. Though he emerges victorious, the battle takes its toll, leaving him severely injured. Is Omni-Man being controlled? Has he been corrupted by power? For now, we don't have those answers. Mark and his mother are informed about what happened, while Cecil Stedman, the head of the Global Defense Agency, launches an investigation. Not long after, Earth faces an alien invasion, and with both the Guardians and Omni-Man out of commission, the planet is left vulnerable. Mark steps up to fight the invaders, alongside a team of heroes, Robot, Duplicate, and Adam Eve. They manage to hold the line, but the overwhelming number of aliens nearly crushes them. Just when all seems lost, Omni-Man recovers and rushes in to help. Not only does he repel the invaders, but he follows them back to their home planet, completely annihilating it as payback for their attack. Message received: these aliens won't be attempting another invasion anytime soon. Back at school, Mark recognizes Adam Eve and learns that she'll be working alongside him as a superhero. He reveals his true identity to her, and she introduces him to her team. Meanwhile, Nolan recovers and resumes training Mark. They are soon called upon to deal with an extraterrestrial visitor who appears to be an enemy. However, it turns out the alien is simply testing Earth's defenses, but he has the wrong planet. Mark explains the mix-up, and the alien leaves peacefully. Cecil enlists Robot to assemble a new team of Guardians. Duplicate and Adam Eve are selected, but Eve quits after discovering that her teammate, Rex Splode, cheated on her with Duplicate. As for Mark, his girlfriend Amber invites him out, but duty calls. He has to leave to save the world. Rex later apologizes to Eve, but before she can tell Mark what happened, she finds him in an intimate moment with Amber and quietly walks away. The Mauler twins attempt to escape, but are quickly recaptured and neutralized. Meanwhile, a mysterious man stumbles upon a powerful artifact, hinting at an important future development. Detective Damian Darkblood, a demon, is investigating the massacre of the Guardians. He confronts Nolan, warning him that even his wife is beginning to suspect him. Cecil devises a plan to send Nolan away from Earth under the guise of overseeing a manned mission to Mars. This would allow for a safer investigation without tipping Nolan off. However, Nolan refuses to leave, so Mark is sent instead. Tensions between Nolan and Debbie continue to rise, though Nolan attempts to regain her trust. On Mars, the Martians capture a group of astronauts, and when Mark tries to rescue them, he is also detained. The Martian leader, afraid that humans might be infected with a parasite that resides on Mars, orders their execution, refusing to let Earth be overrun. Mark manages to return the astronauts to their ship, but one of them is secretly replaced by a Martian imposter. A clever twist, considering how DC's Martian Manhunter came to Earth to protect it. These Martians, however, have their own agenda. Back on Earth, Cecil exorcises Damian, effectively ending his investigation. However, the demon was prepared for this and left his notebook in Nolan's house, Bruuce, where Debbie finds it, confirming her worst suspicions. Meanwhile, the surviving Mauler twin begins cloning himself again under Robot's watchful eye. Elsewhere, Titan asks Invincible for help, despite Nolan's disapproval. The mission goes south, and they are defeated. Debbie, now in possession of Damien's notebook, grows even more suspicious of Nolan. Eve visits Mark to share her future plans. She decides to leave home and live in a forest cabin, embracing a more independent path. Meanwhile, a scientist kidnaps a man and turns him into a powerful, mindless cyborg. Mark jeopardizes his relationship with Amber by leaving to stop the scientist, only to find that the man has already been turned into a deadly weapon. Mark suffers serious injuries battling the cyborgs. In the end, Cecil captures the scientist, but chooses to keep him alive, intrigued by his technology. Debbie visits Nolan's tailor, who analyzes the bloodstains on Nolan's suit, further confirming her suspicions. She then confronts Cecil, who admits he's known the truth about Nolan all along. At the same time, Robot's true nature is revealed. He is actually a physically deformed human who used the Mauler twins' cloning technology to create a new, healthy body for himself. Finally, Mark confesses his identity to Amber, expecting a dramatic reaction. Instead, she reveals she already knew and is furious, not because of his secret, but because he didn't trust her enough to tell her sooner. Everything starts to fall apart as Omni-Man is confronted by Cecil, while the Immortal is resurrected thanks to the twins' technology. Fueled by rage, the Immortal goes after Omni-Man to avenge his fallen teammates, but he is easily defeated once again. News quickly spreads of Omni-Man killing the Immortal, exposing Earth's greatest symbol of justice as a fraud. Omni-Man finally decides to reveal the truth to Mark. He is a Viltrumite, part of a conquering race, and was sent to Earth to prepare it for Viltrumite rule. He tries to convince Mark to join him, but Mark refuses, leading to a brutal fight where Nolan effortlessly overpowers him. However, at the last moment, Nolan realizes he loves his son, and instead of finishing him off, leaves Earth and flies into space. After the dust settles, Mark and Amber rekindle their relationship. Meanwhile, Alan returns to Earth, and after hearing what happened, he tells Mark that this could be a major advantage for the coalition of planets in their war against the Viltrumites. In Season 2, we are shown an alternate version of events where Invincible joins his father, and together they conquer Earth. A resistance led by Adam Eve and other heroes forms, but it is quickly crushed when Mark and Nolan discover their base and massacre everyone, except for one survivor, Angstrom Levy. He is the only person across the entire Invincible multiverse who can travel between dimensions, making it clear that this is an alternate reality. Angstrom's goal is to merge all his multiversal versions into a single, more intelligent being, hoping to use his knowledge to strengthen humanity. Angstrom then arrives in the main timeline and enlists the twins' help to build a machine capable of making his dimensional travels easier. However, before he can complete it, Mark arrives, completely unaware of the situation, and fights the twins. Their battle causes an explosion that nearly kills everyone. Angstrom, severely injured, mistakenly believes Invincible is evil in this universe and vows to destroy him. This season also delves into Alan's backstory. Born on a peaceful planet that was invaded by the Viltrumites, he joined the coalition and was genetically enhanced to become the strongest of his kind. Even with his newfound strength, he was no match for the Viltrumites, leading him to travel the galaxy in search of powerful allies. When he meets Mark, he returns home feeling hopeful about the future. However, the coalition's leader warns that there may be a Viltrumite spy among them. Soon after, the Viltrumites launch a surprise attack, completely overpowering Alan. Though he barely survives, the coalition leader, feeling guilty, disconnects his life support systems, forcing Alan to grow stronger on his own. Meanwhile, Nolan, tormented by guilt over what he did on Earth, aimlessly wanders the universe. He is about to throw himself into a black hole when he notices a spaceship heading straight into it. Without hesitation, he saves the ship, discovering it is filled with insect-like creatures. He follows them to their home planet, where he eventually becomes their leader, even marrying one of them and having a son. Unfortunately, his peace is short-lived. The Viltrumites discover his betrayal and come to punish him for abandoning his mission. Desperate to protect his new home, Omni-Man reaches out to Mark for help. Mark arrives, still furious with his father, but ultimately reconciles with him to defend the alien planet from the Viltrumite invasion. The father-son duo fight side by side, and despite sustaining severe injuries, they manage to win the battle. However, a high-ranking Viltrumite arrives and easily overpowers them both. He declares that Earth must be assimilated into the Viltrumite Empire. As Omni-Man is taken away by the Viltrumites, he tells Mark to read the books he left behind in their home. Back on Earth, Earth, Adam Eve continues protecting the planet while dealing with personal struggles, particularly with her family, who do not accept her. Mark remains on the alien planet for a while since he lacks a spaceship to return home. In gratitude for his help, the insect-like aliens provide him with a ship and ask him to take his half-brother with him. Mark agrees. Upon returning to Earth, Mark introduces his new brother to his mother while struggling to catch up with his academics. Meanwhile, the Guardians of the Globe suspect that they have a traitor among them, which turns out to be a Martian who infiltrated their ranks. Alan wakes up from his coma significantly stronger, revealing that the Coalition leader deliberately removed his life support to help him evolve. It is then revealed that the Coalition's current leader is a rogue Viltrumite who turned against his own people. Elsewhere, spacefaring heroes defeat some Martians, but they are still pursued. When they return to Earth, they discover the chaos that has unfolded during their absence. The Immortal, still grieving the loss of a fallen hero he deeply cared about, isolates himself in sorrow. Mark's younger brother, now named Oliver, is taken in by Debbie, who hires a caretaker for him. Mark and Amber's relationship is stable for now. Mark talks to Art about the importance of reading his dad's books and has already read the ones he had. Art later gives Mark the remaining books, which contain hidden clues about how to defeat the Viltrumites. Alan visits Mark to recruit him for the war against the Viltrumites, but Mark insists that now is a terrible time to leave Earth. Alan asks if he can at least scan Nolan's books to share their secrets with the Coalition. Meanwhile, a parasite infects an astronaut, forcing Mark to leave Amber yet again to fight another monster. The Immortal, still consumed by grief, decides to go into exile. Elsewhere, a resurrected cyborg, tormented by his repeated deaths and resurrections, desperately wishes to end his suffering. Mark tries to spend time with Amber, but their date is interrupted by the sudden arrival of Anissa, a powerful Viltrumite. She threatens Amber's life unless Mark comes with her. Mark complies, and Anissa initially attempts to convince him that surrendering to the Viltrumites is the best course of action. To demonstrate their strength, she kills a powerful monster with ease, arguing that Earth would be much safer under Viltrumite rule. Mark refuses to comply, and Anissa punishes him with a brutal beating. After everything that happened, Amber and Mark break up. Meanwhile, Angstrom Levy kidnaps Debbie and forces Mark to travel across different dimensions while threatening his mother and younger brother. Mark battles him across multiple realities and ultimately kills him, but this leaves him terrified that he might become like his father. Then, Adam Eve appears alongside an alternate version of the Guardians from 20 years in the future. These Guardians open a portal for Mark to return home, but before he leaves, this older Eve confesses that she always had strong feelings for him. She urges Mark to talk to the Eve from his own timeline and tell her how he truly feels. Back in his reality, Mark drops out of school and is just about to confess his feelings to Eve when Kate arrives at the Immortal's place of exile. She reveals that she never actually died. It was just a clone. The two share an emotional hug. Meanwhile, Nolan is still imprisoned by the Viltrumites. He attempts to escape but is ultimately sentenced to death. There, he meets Alan, who purposely got himself captured in an effort to save Nolan. Following this, Invincible faces off against a giant who literally throws an entire mountain at him. However, it does nothing, and Mark defeats the monster with a devastating blow. Witnessing this, Cecil immediately orders an end to the fight, revealing that the entire thing was just a training exercise. Mark's training is paying off, making him stronger, but they all know the Viltrumites remain a significant threat. A new danger arises when a rogue robot seeks independence. Cecil orders Mark to intervene. Unbeknownst to everyone, a spy has infiltrated their base. During a fight against some thieves, Rex tells Mark that he's making a mistake by not confessing his feelings to Adam Eve. At that moment, Rex is attacked by Paul, who believes Rex is responsible for his sister's death. Blinded by rage, Paul refuses to listen and lets his clones beat Rex down. Mark abandons the chase for the thieves to save his friend. Paul refuses to back down, forcing Mark to fight his clones. Before the battle escalates further, Immortal arrives with Paul's sister. Kate blames Immortal for allowing this guilt to fester among their friends for so long. Rex defends himself, stating that Paul was wrong to attack him. Paul, still furious, attempts to punch Rex, but Mark stops him with a single punch. Mark declares that Paul will be sent to prison since his reckless attack allowed the real criminals to escape, making them nearly impossible to track down again. Meanwhile, at Mark's house, his younger brother Oliver is growing at an accelerated rate under the care of April. When Mark returns home, he takes some time to play with Oliver, who excitedly expresses his desire to become a hero like his big brother. He even reveals that he has been secretly training. Mark promises to help him once his powers manifest, only to be shocked when Oliver suddenly demonstrates that he can already fly. ally. Elsewhere, Rex meets with the rest of the Guardians, where Cade and Immortal announce both their return to the team and their engagement. The news is met with excitement. At the same time, Cecil receives reports of mysterious tremors occurring in areas with heavy fracking activity, along with a series of smaller earthquakes across the country under suspicious circumstances. Unable to identify a clear pattern, Cecil decides to temporarily ignore the situation after learning that Oliver's powers have awakened. Mark and his mother discuss the situation, but he reassures her that Oliver won't use his abilities until the three of them have a proper discussion about it. The next day, following his friend's advice, Mark visits Adam and Eve. They talk about their families and Eve's decision to return to school. Finally, Mark gathers the courage to ask her out. Meanwhile, at Mark's house, Debbie is putting makeup on Oliver when Cecil unexpectedly arrives, confronting her about not informing him of Oliver's powers. Debbie makes it clear that her only priority is her family. At the same time, it's revealed that Dr. Seismic is behind the recent earthquakes. Over at the Guardians' base, Rex notices something unusual. Before he can react, monstrous creatures emerge and attack him. Shortly after, Cecil's team is informed that they've lost contact with the Guardians, and Dr. Seismic has mysteriously vanished from his cell. Cecil, now facing mounting concerns, offers to personally oversee Oliver's training, but Debbie immediately refuses. Their argument is cut short when Cecil receives an urgent update on Rex's situation. Elsewhere, Adam and Eve agrees to go on a date with Mark, but their moment is ruined when Mark reveals that his decision was influenced by a version of Eve from the future. This does not sit well with her, and she gets angry. However, before they can argue, Cecil summons them urgently. Having overheard their conversation, Oliver decides to go help his brother, but Debbie catches him before he can leave. Deep underground, Dr. Seismic and his creatures have imprisoned the heroes. He boasts that in the past, he tried to conquer the world to improve it, only to be stopped by superheroes who protected the interests of capitalism. Now he seeks revenge on all of humanity. Just as he prepares to unleash a massive earthquake, Mark and Eve arrive to stop him. Seismic mocks Mark as the stereotypical hero and dismisses Eve as token representation before launching an attack with his army of monsters. Back at Mark's house, Oliver apologizes to Debbie for lying. Though worried, she understands his reasons and, after some reflection, finally agrees to let him start training. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve tries to free the Guardians but is intercepted by Seismic. Mark, struggling against a monster, is severely injured. Before he can recover, Seismic lands a devastating blow. When Mark regains consciousness, he realizes that he and Eve are now trapped, and within 5 seconds, an apocalyptic earthquake is set to begin. With no other options, Cecil plays his final card, deploying his newest superhero, Darkwing 2, alongside an elite squad of deadly clones. Their intervention successfully frees the Guardians. Another fight breaks out, and this time, Seismic's forces are being overwhelmed. Desperate, the villain launches his final attack, but Darkwing intercepts him at the last second, preventing disaster. Seizing the opportunity, Invincible strikes Darkwing in anger. Furious that a murderer has been recruited as a hero, he refuses to accept the presence of mindless clones. Frustrated, Mark realizes he was naive to trust Cecil. Tired of the manipulation, he abandons the battle and heads back to confront his boss. Cecil tries to justify himself, explaining that the new Darkwing is atoning for his past crimes by doing good. He also reminds Mark that he's in no position to make demands. After all, he killed Angstrom Levy. Mark insists it's not the same and that criminals belong in prison. Before he knows it, he's been led into the White Room, where Cecil has gathered an army of cyborgs. Meanwhile, in the Viltrumite prison, Omni-Man is speaking with Alan. He warns that they need to escape before the Viltrumites decide to dissect him to uncover the source of his strength. Alan, confident in his own abilities, doesn't seem too worried until his worst fears come true. He is subjected to horrific experiments but manages to survive. Back in the White Room, Cecil argues that Mark is becoming more and more of a threat. But when one of the clones tries to restrain him, Invincible reacts in the worst way possible, by completely destroying it. He unleashes his fury on them all. Mark accuses Cecil of being a coward. Cecil deploys more cyborgs and threatens him. Mark doesn't back down. With no other options, Cecil activates a sound frequency that incapacitates him. The pain is unbearable, and Mark is forced to flee at full speed. Weakened, Mark reaches the Guardians' base, begging for help, claiming that Cecil wants him dead. Cecil arrives, insisting that his plan was never to kill Mark, only to make him realize he's out of control. Mark refuses to listen. Cecil activates the frequency again. Seeing this, the Guardians take Mark's side and begin fighting Cecil's clones. Rex takes a direct shot at Cecil's Cecil's device, destroying it, but it doesn't work. Mark takes a brutal beating but manages to get up and tear through the cyborgs with incredible force. Cecil tries to make amends. Mark isn't interested. He cuts ties completely.
And if you ever come near my family again, I will kill you.
Then, Mark leaves to reunite with his family. When Debbie finds out what happened, she can't help but feel responsible. Oliver, upon learning that his brother is no longer part of the Guardians, vows to support him whenever he needs help. Everyone advises Oliver not to rush into adulthood, that he should enjoy his childhood before taking on such heavy responsibilities. Meanwhile, Mark's relationship with Eve is improving. She reassures him that she's on his side. Eve admits she was really worried about him. Mark takes the moment to confess his feelings, telling her he's liked her for a long time, but never said anything because she was with Rex. Eve asks for some time to think. At the Guardians' base, a debate erupts, dividing the heroes. Some believe Mark has become the real villain, while others see Cecil as the true threat, treating them all as mere weapons. Rex proposes that they leave the team and form their own group. Immortal loses his patience, reminding everyone that the Guardians are the best superhero team in the world, and that being part of them is a privilege. With that, he tells anyone who's unhappy that they are free to leave. Rex, Amanda, Zandale, and Rudy take him up on the offer and walk away. Immortal is convinced they'll come back eventually. Debbie agrees to go on a date with Paul. During their time together, she can't stop talking about her kids. Meanwhile, Samantha begins her studies in architecture at the university. Back at the Guardians' base, Cecil watches with concern as his team shrinks. The recent defections have significantly weakened their overall strength. Because of this, he proposes that Darkwing join the team. Darkwing humbly introduces himself, acknowledging his past mistakes and making it clear that he wants to redeem himself by protecting society from villains. Immortal accepts him as a new member. Cecil speaks with Donald, reflecting on how villains can be redeemed while heroes can fall from grace. A flashback takes us to the time when Cecil first took control of the Pentagon and became responsible for Earth's defense. It was then that he met Donald for the first time. Cecil's staff underestimated him due to his criminal past. While monitoring global security, Cecil witnesses Omni-Man fighting a monstrous creature. This is his chance to prove himself as a strategist. Nolan claims he was sent to protect humanity. Cecil remains polite but skeptical, but this is all part of Cecil's plan. By reading Nolan's body language, he realizes he's lying. Since they don't have the power to take down Omni-Man, they accept his help. At the same time, Cecil orders his team to start developing a contingency plan for when Omni-Man inevitably turns against them. Back in the present, Cecil states that his primary goal has always been to protect Earth. Mark meets with Samantha and confesses that when he was on the brink of death, all he could think about was her. He tells her they can't just be friends anymore. Finally, she accepts their relationship. And as all of this unfolds, a duo of villains is defeated by Sandale and decides to leave their life of crime behind. At first, things go well as they transition into regular jobs, but a tax increase forces them to look for additional work. Unfortunately, they struggle to find any, which takes a toll on their performance at their current jobs. Their manager treats them with disdain, and eventually, they decide to quit. That same afternoon, they discover that the bank they once tried to rob is reopening. Desperate, one of them suggests they give it another shot, but his partner refuses, warning that returning to crime would be a one-way road. They try to stay on the right path, but as money runs out, they end up homeless and begging on the streets. Eventually, despair takes over, and both decide to rob the bank again. However, this time, they are intercepted by Invincible. With no other choice, they try to flee, but Mark pursues them. They manage to get the upper hand on him for a moment, until Oliver arrives and lands a punch on one of them. One of the villains hesitates upon realizing Oliver is just a kid, giving Mark the opening he needs to take them both down. With the situation resolved, Mark scolds Oliver for interfering and takes him home, where Debbie punishes him. Alongside his mother, Mark insists on keeping his promise to train Oliver and assures her that he will guide his brother down the right path. After some reluctance, Debbie agrees. At the university, Amber and Samantha reunite after a long time. Mark's ex-girlfriend invites Samantha to spend some time together. During their conversation, Samantha fills Amber in on everything that has happened recently in Mark's life, including his connection with Cecil and his killing of Angstrom Levy. Amber, unfazed, says that if Mark did it, it must have been necessary. She notes that, unlike her and Mark, Samantha and Mark share the same world of heroes, which will only strengthen their bond. Meanwhile, the Guardians who left the team arrive at their new base and begin working together to get the place back in shape. During the reconstruction, Rex seizes the opportunity to take an ally to his old room, where they share stories from their past. She recounts how her parents discovered her abilities and subjected her to obsessive training. In turn, Rex reveals that his parents sold him to the government when they found out he had powers, handing him over to scientists who conducted horrific experiments on him. However, knowing he's not the only one with a tragic past gives him some comfort. Shortly after, Adam Eve arrives at the new base with a decision. She's going home to make peace with her parents. Meanwhile, Mr. Liu, one of the most influential figures in the Order, meets with the leader of the local mafia to demand his cooperation in freeing Multipol. The mob boss refuses, arguing that Multipol acted on his own out of revenge, and that it's not his responsibility to intervene. His associate reminds him that defying the Order would be a fatal mistake, endangering not only his own life but also his family's. With no other choice, the mob boss agrees to help, but makes it clear that this will be a one-time favor. On another front, Mark begins training his brother Oliver, starting with flying at high speeds around the city. Oliver, impatient, wants to jump straight into combat training, but before that, Mark takes him to Art, who will design his first superhero suit. During their visit, Oliver introduces himself as Kid Omni-Man, but Art insists that Mark explain why that name is inappropriate. He warns that everyone still fears their father and will likely never forgive him for what he did to the original Guardians. Understanding this, Oliver agrees to change his superhero name. At that moment, Art realizes that Invincible is no longer working for Cecil and shows him a new suit in blue and black. Before they can discuss it further, their conversation is interrupted by an alert about a prison break. With no time to waste, Mark decides to take Oliver with him. Upon arrival, Invincible recognizes the villains Kursk, who controls electricity, and Furnace, a lava-powered criminal. Eager to fight, Oliver rushes in, but Mark stops him, laying down two key rules. In public, he must call him Invincible, and right now, he is not allowed to engage in battles. Oliver ignores him and charges at Kursk, only to be effortlessly knocked down. Furious, Invincible counterattacks with a powerful punch. The fight turns brutal as he slams the villains into the walls and strikes Furnace with enough force to destroy his containment suit. As a result, Furnace's molten body collapses onto Kursk, killing him. Once Oliver recovers, he is ashamed, admits his mistake, and apologizes to his brother. Outside the battlefield, in her personal life, Debbie finally tells Paul the truth. Her husband is Omni-Man, and he is still alive. Shocked by the revelation, Paul confesses his doubts, fearing he'll never live up to the void that Omni-Man left in her life. Debbie assures him she's not looking for someone to replace Nolan, but rather someone who will accept her and stand by her side. Moved by her words, Paul decides to stay with her. Elsewhere, Samantha reunites with her family and, as a peace offering, promises not to use her powers while she's there. She tells them that if they can't accept her for who she truly is, she will leave their lives forever. With no better options, her parents agree to the arrangement and welcome her back home. Later that night, when Mark and Oliver return home, they accidentally walk in on Debbie and Paul in an intimate moment. Realizing that Paul already knows the truth, the situation becomes increasingly awkward. The situation settles down when the news reports on Invincible's latest battle, highlighting his new look.
You're Invincible now?
Later, Mark and Samantha meet up to talk about their day. Unbeknownst to them, a hidden camera is watching. Elsewhere, the Mahler twins attempt to steal a nuclear missile, but before they can put their plan into motion, they're intercepted by the Guardians of the Globe. However, the villains remain confident. They have a weapon designed to attack the nervous system, and it proves highly effective against Immortal and anyone caught in its range. Darkwing strikes one of the twins, but they anticipated this, and their weapon works against him too. One by one, the heroes fall. Seeing this on TV, Mark has no choice but to intervene. He bursts into the base just before the Maulers can launch the missile. Because of his new suit, they mistake him for a rookie, but when they use their weapon, they discover it works on him too. Meanwhile, Oliver learns that his brother is in a fight and rushes to help, convinced Mark might need backup. At that moment, Oliver arrives at full speed and destroys the Mauler's weapon with a single blow. Furious, the twins attack Oliver, and Mark, now angrier and more powerful, fights back. Realizing they're losing control of the situation, the Maulers activate the missile. With no other choice, Mark tells Oliver to handle the Maulers while he stops the missile. But unlike Mark, Oliver doesn't know how to hold back. He delivers a brutal punch to one of the twins. Mark destroys the missile with a single hit. When the Guardians recover, they're in shock, realizing they were saved by a kid. That's when Cecil arrives, trying to calm Oliver down. Things take a turn for the worse when Mark, still on edge, instinctively threatens Cecil before realizing what just happened. happened. Looking down at his brother, he finally processes that Oliver just killed someone. Without hesitation, Mark grabs Oliver and takes him into the sky, furious. He reminds Oliver of the promise he made to never cross that line. Oliver, trying to justify himself, insists it was an accident. And besides, at least the Maulers won't be hurting anyone ever again. The argument escalates. Oliver, frustrated, tries to fly away at high speed, but Mark chases him down, forcing him to listen. Mark tells him that life is valuable. It's not something to be taken so lightly. Oliver, unmoved, argues that humans waste their lives. They're not special like him and Mark. Hearing those words, Mark is immediately reminded of his father. To Mark's shock, Oliver goes a step further.
You act like you know everything, but do you ever think that maybe Dad was right?
Mark can't believe what he just heard. Later, the whole family gathers, and Debbie confronts Oliver. She asks if, as a mere human, her life is worth less than his. Oliver hesitates, but insists that she's different. Debbie explains that no matter how special he thinks he is, every human life matters. Something clicks for Oliver. He promises never to do it again. Just as things start to settle down, Mark notices a hidden camera watching them. When he grabs it, it self-destructs. That's when they realize someone else is watching them, and it's not just Cecil. Rex and Rachel were in that fantastic phase of life where they could no longer rely on the Pentagon to pay the bills. So off they went to the grocery store, because surprise, heroes need to eat too. In the middle of shopping, Rex started complaining, because, of course, complaining is free. Kate used to handle everything, so all he had to do was stuff his face with pizza and coffee. Rachel, on the other hand, was all discipline, revealing that she grew up on a stricter diet than an Olympic athlete. When she offers to cook, she quickly realizes that Rex is 2 seconds away from suggesting takeout and shuts him down. If he's not going to help, he should at least stay out of the way. Defeated before the battle even started, Rex accepts his fate and goes to grab the dairy. Boom, an explosion, a supervillain attack, and there go the groceries for the month. Meanwhile, Mark, the king of impulsive decisions, sends a spy drone after Rudy to figure out who's been watching him. The analysis reveals one concerning detail. The drone's owner knows everything about him and his family. The problem? The drone is more busted than a decade-old laptop with no updates, so tracking the creator is a no-go. The only thing they do know, it was made on Earth. Mark, channeling his best Cecil, I know it was you energy, decides to break into the Pentagon. He takes down some generic clone goons and starts feeling like the main character, until Cecil flips the switch and leaves him paralyzed. Mark looks up at Cecil, who just smirks and says,
"If we wanted to spy on you, you'd never know it."
Mark leaves with a giant question mark over his head, while Donald, who clearly has more sense of responsibility than his own boss, admits that, yes, the government is keeping tabs on the Graysons, but that drone, not theirs. Now Cecil wants answers. The story takes a, sort of, romantic break with Mark and Samantha on a date in Paris. Everything's beautiful, the moment is right, the kiss is about to happen, and bam, a portal opens. Fightmaster and Dropkick, 2 time travelers with zero sense of, maybe this isn't the best time, step out and invite Mark to save the future. No details, no context, just vibes. Mark and Samantha, already seasoned veterans of this nonsense, give them 10 seconds to explain before throwing hands. The travelers reveal that their world was destroyed by a tyrant king, and according to legend, only Invincible can stop him. Mark, who has definitely heard this kind of sales pitch before, declines. But because the universe hates him, he gets yanked into the portal mid-refusal. Arriving in the future, Mark finds himself in a setting worse than a canceled show with no finale. The Tyrant King rules with an iron fist. People live under mass executions and slavery, and the resistance, desperate, tried using ink from the Declaration of Independence as poison. Spoiler, it didn't work. Trying to make sense of the madness, Mark asks if the king is a Viltrumite. The travelers just blink. They cause a distraction, allowing themselves to get captured on purpose to infiltrate the castle. Once inside, Mark finally sees the big reveal. The Tyrant King is none other than immortal, and the worst part, he blames Mark for everything. In the past, Mark supposedly took over the planet and made a terrible decision that led to this disaster. Immortal became king just to try and clean up the mess.
End my torment!
Mark hesitates, but under pressure, he ends up taking his head off. The people celebrate their newfound freedom, but Mark doesn't see anything heroic about it. Back in the present, he tries to resume his date, but ends up confessing to Samantha that he was forced to kill Immortal. Worse, he's terrified of what that says about him. Samantha, with the cold composure of someone who's seen worse, simply tells him that if he ever goes off the deep end, she'll be the one to put him down. Before returning to their dinner, they make a quick stop in Washington to return the Declaration of Independence. Meanwhile, Far from Mark's romantic time-traveling nightmare, Alan is busy trying not to die in a Viltrumite prison. He proposes an escape plan to Omni-Man, but the old man is in full "I deserve to suffer" mode and refuses. Omni-Man sees himself as a traitor with no place in the world. Then, the dreaded Viltrumite enforcers arrive to finish the job. Alan, unable to sit back and watch, starts a prison riot and frees the inmates, including Battle Beast, a warrior who needs the barest excuse to start breaking people. The deal? Battle Beast helps with the escape, and in return, Alan promises him a worthy fight. In the execution chamber, Omni-Man is seconds away from meeting his end when Alan and Battle Beast make a dramatic entrance. A brutal brawl ensues. Alan nearly dies, and Omni-Man, finally snapping out of his self-pity spiral, joins the fight. In the end, the enforcers are dead. The escape is a success, and a shocking truth is revealed. The Viltrumite Empire isn't as strong as it seems. There are fewer than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites left in the universe, meaning, for all its grandeur, the Empire can be brought down. The story picks up with Titan in full-on dad mode, dropping his daughter off at school because even supervillains have bills to pay and dad duties to fulfill, drops her off and goes about his day. But peace doesn't last long. His right-hand man sends a warning about trouble brewing. Meanwhile, over at the annual Prison Break Festival, Multipaul is giving his best shot at escaping the only way he knows how, cloning himself until there's literally no room left in the cell. The plan? Become a human pressure bomb until the walls give out. And shockingly, it works. Bodies pile up, the door blasts open, and he almost tastes freedom until a ninja-like guard appears out of nowhere and slaps an inhibitor collar on him. Game over. Later, Kate swings by the prison to try and convince him that his supervillain career isn't exactly thriving, and maybe, just maybe, he should consider working with the Guardians of the Globe instead. But Paul, overflowing with the confidence of someone who has failed spectacularly many times before, believes the Order still needs him. Kate insists he's being manipulated, but Paul naturally thinks she just doesn't understand his genius master plan, which probably involves more clones getting crushed, I'm guessing. Cut to the Grayson household, where Mark and Samantha are enjoying a nice breakfast with Debbie and Oliver. The problem? Oliver, being a brutally honest kid,
Mark wasn't sleeping. He and Eve had a sleepover.
Mark blurts out that he's thinking about moving in with Samantha. Debbie, caught between supporting her son and wanting to say, "Please don't," ultimately gives her blessing, but admits she enjoys having him around. Later, Samantha decides to put her civilian alter ego to use and visits a prison in Peoria to discuss overcrowding. Her solution? Bring in a superhero for security. The warden responds with that classic, "I don't get paid enough for this" look. Across town, Titan decides it's time for a heart-to-heart with Machine Head. The topic? A threat from Lou, the leader of the Order. Machine Head, who's definitely had better days since his stint in prison, sarcastically points out that Titan is playing with fire. Titan argues that the line was crossed when Lou threatened his family, but Machine Head just states the obvious. The Order doesn't take hostages, they make examples. With few options left, Titan figures it might be worth asking Mark for help. He tries to pitch the idea that under his leadership, the neighborhood has become a crime-free paradise. Mark, unsurprisingly, isn't buying the sales pitch and shuts him down immediately, reminding Titan that he's still a criminal. As expected, Titan doesn't take rejection well and makes a quick getaway through the sewers. Mark, ever the dedicated hero, gives chase, only to end up lost in a crowd of identical-looking men. Great job, Mark. The real turning point comes when Lou's deadline for Titan runs out. He shows up to deliver Order-style justice. Titan attempts a quick checkmate, ordering Isotope to teleport Lou high into the sky and let him drop. Plot twist. Isotope betrays him and sides with Lou instead. And then Lou, because this show loves a dramatic power-up, transforms into a massive dragon. Just because. Titan, who clearly didn't anticipate this kind of upgrade, gets absolutely wrecked. But Lou isn't done yet. He's making a quick detour to prison to break out Multipaul. Enter Mark and Samantha. The fight is intense, but Lou has dragon skin, meaning Mark's punches feel more like friendly pats. Samantha tries to get creative, setting up a force field and morphing into a weapon to give Mark some extra power. It kind of works, except the collateral damage conveniently allows several prisoners to escape, including Multipaul, who immediately starts mass-producing clones like he's running a factory. Lou, however, is not here to play around. He severely injures Mark and takes him down, but just when all hope seems lost, Machine Head reappears out of nowhere. He doesn't kill Liu outright. That would be too easy. Instead, he uses Isotope to take out Liu's bodyguard, leaving the Dragon Man vulnerable. And of course, he leaves Liu to die, because betrayal is an art form. With Liu out of the picture, Machine Head takes control of the Order. Titan, barely surviving, considers leaving the life of crime for good, But Machine Head gives him a warning: any slip-up, and the punishment will be severe. Mark, still processing everything, wonders if getting involved in this mess was the right call. Samantha tries to lift his spirits, reminding him that at least they stopped Multipol from escaping, which is a total lie, but sure. Over at the Guardians of the Globe HQ, Kate discovers that Multipol actually did escape and left behind a little farewell message. Meanwhile, Lou, who everyone assumed was dead, is recovered by his loyal second-in-command. And in classic villain fashion, an ancient ritual is performed. The dragon spirit returns to Lou's body. Because let's be real, no one actually stays dead in this universe. A peaceful park, happy families, kids running around, pigeons plotting their next strategic bombing run. Amidst all this, we meet Scott, a chill middle-aged guy showing off his electric powers to his niece. Her eyes light up like a dashboard on a scorching day, and she begs for an even cooler trick. But Scott, with the tone of a man who's faced one too many disappointments, tells her this is as good as it gets. He steps away to grab a coffee, and suddenly, boom! The sky erupts. A colossal impact shakes the city. That peaceful afternoon, gone. Now it's a full-blown disaster movie, the kind where Michael Bay would be taking notes. Scott regains consciousness amid the wreckage. Forget the coffee. There are bodies everywhere. But the worst part? His family is trapped under the rubble. He scrambles to save them, but before he can do anything, another impact. A whole building collapses onto his sister and niece. Total despair. He looks up to see the culprits: Invincible and Omni-Man, duking it out like the world is their personal fight club. And Scott, just another bystander left in the dust, powerless to do anything but watch them fly away, indifferent to the chaos they've left behind. Scott decides to seek justice the only way he knows how: through bureaucracy. He intercepts District Attorney Barnett in a parking lot, clutching a petition with over 1,000 signatures demanding accountability for Invincible. Barnett, exuding the patience of a customer service rep on their last nerve, simply tells him superheroes operate outside human law. Scott argues, questioning why heroes are above consequences, but it's clear the system couldn't care less. Frustrated, he throws the documents to the ground and storms off like a kid denied a happy meal. Sometime later, we find Scott at the Pentagon's weapons lab, where he works. While his colleagues debate Invincible's latest battle, he can only think about the destruction. One scientist tries to rationalize, he's our only defense against the Viltrumites. But all Scott hears is white noise. All he sees is a killer being celebrated as a savior. Meanwhile, across the city, a new villain makes his debut: Elephant Man, a militant vegan who takes things to the extreme. He starts tearing through businesses that sell meat until Oliver slams him into a car. Mark scolds his brother for ignoring the civilians around them, but Oliver is more interested in throwing hands. Adam Eve steps in, asking Oliver not to wreck one particular restaurant because she still likes eating there. Oliver begrudgingly holds back. Elephant Man, realizing he's just Oliver's personal punching bag, tries to fight back. Spoiler, it doesn't go well. After the beatdown, Oliver complains that he needs a stronger opponent. Mark and Oliver talk. Oliver, deep in thought, wonders if Omni-Man saved so many lives before trying to take over Earth. Was he really a monster? Mark, exhausted, gives a blunt truth. He saved more people than he killed, but that doesn't erase the ones who died. Oliver suggests Mark tell the world the real story of the Viltrumite Empire. He also recalls his childhood, remembering his mother's love. Mark counters, Omni-Man was two people at once. Oliver is left questioning who their father truly was.
I still love Dad, but he was two different people.
Scott realizes if the system won't act, he will. He adopts a new identity, Powerplex. With help from an old friend of his sister, he gets enhancements that boost his electrical powers. The activation process? A hammer and years of bottled up rage. As the energy surges through him, Scott cries. Partly from emotion, mostly from pain. A lot of pain. At the Grayson house, the family sits down for dinner. Conversation flows until Paul, Debbie's boyfriend, starts dropping life lessons about reputation and success. Later, alone with Debbie, he admits he doesn't know how to fit into her son's lives. She reassures him just being there is enough. Their moment is cut short by Oliver, lurking like a total creep. Meanwhile, Scott tests his powers by jumping off a building. Miraculously, he survives. Mark and Samantha attend William's birthday party. Everything seems fine until Mark spots Amber with her new boyfriend, Kyle. Tension builds, but Kyle turns out to be a fellow nerd, and he and Mark bond instantly. The party is interrupted by a live broadcast. Powerplex wants a showdown with Invincible. Mark sees it and shrugs.
I can take a night off.
Everyone is shocked, except Kyle, who just wants to keep drinking. The next day, Mark gets ready for a memorial ceremony honoring the victims of Chicago. He hesitates, but Samantha convinces him. He was a victim of Omni-Man too. Paul offers him a ride, but Mark solves the problem by lifting the car and flying with it, leaving Paul in full panic mode. Meanwhile, Rudy completes an experiment that ensures Amanda's transformations won't shorten her lifespan anymore. She bursts into tears and hugs him in gratitude. At the ceremony, Powerplex appears, reciting the names of the victims. Mark steps forward to intervene, but Eve stops him. "Your presence will only make things worse." Debbie agrees. Eve tries reasoning with Powerplex, but he accuses her of being complicit. When words fail, Eve resorts to force. But the more he gets hit, the stronger he becomes. He unleashes a massive energy wave, but Eve manages to contain it until the Guardians arrive. Powerplex is taken into custody. On the way, he insists he never hurt anyone. The guards respond bluntly, "That was just dumb luck." Back home, Scott panics. If the government finds out who he is, he's done for. His wife reassures him, it's not over yet. Meanwhile, Mark investigates Powerplex and realizes someone has been tracking his movements. In the end, the mastermind is revealed. Angstrom Levy has assembled an army of Invincibles from alternate universes. We rewind time and guess what? Angstrom Levy, the guy who basically got his face rearranged by Invincible, is still breathing. Barely. His skull looks like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. But like any stubborn villain, he uses his last ounce of strength to open a portal and get himself rescued by a group of scientists who specialize in fixing people that really shouldn't be fixable. And surprise, they pull it off. A few months later, Levy is back in one piece, and he's not just out for revenge anymore. He wants to turn Mark's reputation into radioactive waste. To do that, he recruits an army of alternate Invincibles, promising them whatever they want in exchange for turning Earth into a smoldering crater. Meanwhile, our boy Mark Grayson is deep in his everything is my fault era. And honestly, fair enough. He's got trauma piling up, tragedies stacking like Jenga blocks. Samantha, trying to be the supportive girlfriend, cancels dinner with her parents to comfort him. But Mark, ever perceptive, realizes she's avoiding introducing him to her family. And it makes sense. Her parents hate superheroes. But compared to what he's been through with his dad, Mark figures nothing could be worse. Before this conversation can turn into a full-blown sitcom subplot, they get an urgent call. And no, it's not a spam warranty extension. The Multiversal Invincibles have officially kicked off the apocalypse. And then, pure chaos. Prisons are reduced to dust, villains escape, governments collapse, and the destruction escalates to a level that makes disaster movies look like a minor inconvenience. Rex decides to be a good guy for once and helps Rachel move into a neighborhood that looks like it belongs in an 80s crime movie.
You know what's another good place? My new bedroom.
But once the attacks start, he's forced to suit up. Rachel, retired, wants to join the fight, but Rex hits her with the classic stay put move. Mark, of course, ends up facing one of his evil doppelgangers. After a battle that feels like a lost episode of Dragon Ball Z, he wins. But then he notices something. He's being filmed. And you know what that means? Congratulations, Mark. You're now the villain of the story. When his allies arrive, they see the wreckage and assume he caused it. With no time to explain, they attack. Meanwhile, Powerplex, who scored an unexpected get-out-of-jail-free card in the chaos, watches from the sidelines. Elsewhere, Oliver ignores his mom's warnings and rushes out to help civilians. In the middle of the mess, he spots someone wearing Mark's suit and, in peak naive little brother fashion, goes in for a friendly hello. Spoiler, it's not Mark. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, Cecil and Donald start putting the pieces together. These clones? Dangerous, sure, but none of them are as strong as the real Invincible, which means there's still a chance to turn the tide. Day 2 arrives, and the remaining heroes rally for a final stand. Mark and Samantha take on a clone in a yellow suit, who after a brutal fight is finally defeated. But then, another shows up, this one rocking an Omni-Man inspired outfit. He ignores every command and goes full massacre mode. In the heat of battle, he shatters Samantha's leg, taking her out of commission. Mark, torn between protecting her and fighting, gets backup from Cecil's soulless clones, buying him just enough time to get his girlfriend to safety. Meanwhile, the Guardians' base is overrun. And this is where the real bloodbath begins. Immortal, decapitated. Again, because that's just his thing at this point. Duplicates clones, ripped apart. Rex, in a final act of heroism,
My entire goddamn skeleton, dickhead.
Rachel arrives too late. On day 3, Angstrom Levy kicks back, cracks open a beer, and admires his handiwork. But then he starts to notice. Not all of the clones are fully on board with his plan. Some want to return to their own universes. Others start coming up with unexpected ideas, like saving Debbie and taking her to a parallel world. As the rebellion grows, Levy goes full my way or the highway and teleports them all to a dead universe where he once fought Mark. Meanwhile, Mark gets word that Levy's been found. He heads straight for the final confrontation, and this time, he's not in the mood for conversation. Angstrom tries to throw him into a portal using a swarm of drones, but Mark fights through and nearly kills him. Oliver arrives, blunt as ever, and tells his brother to finish the job. But before the final blow lands, Levy escapes, leaving behind an entire arm as a parting gift. On the other side of the portal, Levy, now rocking the one-armed look and an even lower dignity score, begs the scientists for help, but plot twist, they figured out he played them, and now they're forcing him to obey them, with the lovely incentive of being dissected if he doesn't comply. Ah, karma, beautiful thing. Back on Earth, Mark surveys the aftermath, knowing the road to recovery will be long. But the worst part? The world has no idea what really happened. All they know is that multiple versions of Invincible showed up and tore everything apart. His reputation? In absolute ruins. And Powerplex? He's already out there spreading the gospel that Invincible was always the villain. And just when you think things couldn't get worse, a Viltrumite shows up, standing in front of Mark, and delivers his verdict. Execution. For failing to uphold his end of the deal. But this time, Mark doesn't flinch. No fear, no hesitation. He just stares him down, ready for another fight. Because being a hero was never about winning. It was about losing everything and still standing back up. Mark and Conquest lock eyes. And the next thing you know, they're throwing hands so hard, the entire city feels it. Some poor guy just trying to enjoy his morning coffee? Forget it. Buildings shake, cars go flying. Mark does his best to hold his ground. But Conquest? The old man is having the time of his life. He's got his villain monologue locked and loaded. And of course, plenty of time to smash Mark's face into the pavement. Because at this point, it's basically tradition. Here comes the classic Viltrumite speech, but with a twist. Conquest isn't here to recruit Mark. He's here because he likes fighting. World domination? Nah. Grandpa Annihilation just wants to feel his fist covered in blood. Healthy hobby, right? Mark thinks he's about to turn the tide as he yeets Conquest like a garbage bag out a window. He then drags him through the city, smashing through buildings along the way. The cycle continues. Mark gets wrecked, gets up, spits blood, tries to fight back, fails, repeat. The difference? Conquest is enjoying this. He even lets Mark land a hit, just for the thrill of seeing him try. So Mark switches it up, grabs Conquest's ears, trying to hurt him. The old man just laughs and praises him like he's a dog learning a new trick. The fight escalates, and naturally, they end up in space. Mark manages to throw Conquest out of the atmosphere, but the old man spits out frozen blood, which turns into a weird space crystal, and rockets back to Earth even more hyped than before. Mark goes for a brutal knee to the stomach. The result? More laughter. Conquest already decided Mark was going to lose. He's just waiting for him to accept it. Meanwhile, Mark is turning into a walking Bruuce, and every news channel is covering it. Debbie watches in horror. Oliver begs Mark to retreat. Paula tries to deliver some classic anime protagonist speech, but the reality is, Mark looks like a Lego figure falling apart. He barely has time to breathe before Conquest dives from the sky like a missile and crushes him again. Oliver tries to step in, but the old Viltrumite is too fast. The kid watches helplessly as Mark gets brutalized. Out of strength, Mark begs Conquest to stop, and he does. Just long enough to grab Mark by the throat and slam him back down. Is it over? Of course not. Conquest wants more. The city's already in ruins, but that's not enough. If Mark doesn't fight properly, he'll start killing civilians. Now the fight turns into sheer panic. Mark tries to stop him, but his body won't cooperate. Conquest notices and makes it clear. When he's done with Mark, he'll wipe out humanity. Then, a shadow. Oliver charges in. One last glimmer of hope. Conquest? Unbothered. With a single hit, he sends Oliver crashing down like a broken action figure. Now the fight is a full-blown spectacle. Mark can barely stand, and Conquest casually strolls over, waiting for the next round. Then comes the final taunt. Mark should have planned better. Now, he's paying the price. Conquest wants to see how much Mark can take. Wants to see if he has a heart, or if he'll have to rip it out to find out. Something snaps in Mark's mind. He can't keep taking this. He won't. His body moves before his brain can catch up. A hit, a headbutt, right to the old man's face. For the first time, Conquest shuts up. The silence lasts a second before a twisted grin appears. Now this is a fight. The punches come harder. Raw frustration, anger, and desperation behind every blow. The sheer force distorting the air. But the problem? Conquest is still laughing. On the other side of the world, Cecil is on the verge of a breakdown. The news is pure chaos, and all he can think is, why now? Earth barely survived the last disaster. He needs backup. But when he asks about the Invincible Reaniman, his big contingency plan, the answer hits him like a gut punch. They need 2 more weeks. 2 weeks? Cecil is livid. He needs them now. Earth doesn't have 2 weeks. Hell, Mark doesn't even have 2 minutes. The news doesn't change. Invincible is getting wrecked. In the hospital, the room is thick with tension. Then, something shifts in Eve's mind. She can't sit still. Ignoring the pain, she gets up. A nurse tries to stop her, but it's too late. After a week of unconsciousness, Eve finally opens her eyes. She still hurts, but she doesn't care about her own recovery, only about Mark. Her father tries to reassure her, tells her no one will figure out who she is in there. But that doesn't matter. The fight is still happening. She looks at the TV and sees Mark getting demolished. Her heartbeat races. She knows she can't just sit here. Against medical advice, she raises her hand and crafts a new suit right then and there, in front of everyone. Her father, stunned, finally puts the pieces together. The Invincible getting his ass kicked on TV is his daughter's boyfriend, but Eve doesn't care. She won't rest. She's going to fight. On the battlefield, Mark holds on as best he can. His vision darkens with every blow, but he keeps going. He can't stop. For Conquest, though, the fight is just getting started. The villain decides it's time to turn the massacre up a notch. Until now, he was just toying with Mark. He stomps on Mark's chest, pinning him against the shattered concrete. The ground cracks beneath them, and Mark feels his ribs buckle under the pressure. The humiliation is endless. Conquest brings up Nolan, says he was a promising warrior, but he died before reaching his true potential, that it would have been an honor to kill both father and son together. But Mark knows the truth. Nolan is still alive. Then, out of nowhere, a surprise hit slams into Conquest. Oliver is back in the fight. His eyes burn with rage as he charges the villain. This time, he's not holding back. Oliver makes a fatal mistake. He assumes Conquest is old, so he must be weak. But before he can even finish his sentence, the Viltrumite laughs, and then the nightmare begins. Conquest moves so fast that Oliver doesn't even register what happened. Dazed, he tastes his own blood and realizes he just made the biggest mistake of his life. The old man doesn't waste time. He grabs Oliver. Still on the ground, Mark feels a chill crawl up his spine. Conquest starts to pull, slowly, deliberately, just to make it hurt more. Mark feels pure panic explode inside him. He doesn't think, he just moves. Instinct takes over as he launches himself at Conquest at full speed. He needs to save Oliver, and for the first time, sheer desperation makes Mark move faster than he ever has before. Conquest locks eyes with him and throws in one last jab. No matter what happens, he'd rather eat Mark's heart than the brat's. Meanwhile, Cecil is at his breaking point. The kind of stress that comes from putting out fire after fire, disaster after disaster. He grabs Oliver, and with the cold detachment of someone who's seen too much horror, orders the doctors to do the impossible. The last thing he needs right now is another body added to the mess this day has become. As if things couldn't get worse, he tells Donald to call Debbie. At least she can take some comfort in knowing that for now, her son is still breathing. Given the circumstances, that's already a miracle. Eve wakes up and wants to talk to Cecil. Great, another one trying to stop the apocalypse. But there's a problem. Conquest isn't just strong, he's absurdly strong. Stronger than Nolan. Cecil knows Eve isn't ready for another fight, but Mark is alone, and the alternative is letting him become Viltrumite Chow. So, with no other choice, Eve flies straight into disaster. Meanwhile, Mark is already living a nightmare. Conquest, the old bastard, is having the time of his life being sadistic. He strikes a villainous pose and uses Mark as a baseball bat to split civilians in half, because a basic massacre just wasn't enough. Mark is exploding with rage, but Conquest couldn't care less. And then Eve arrives. Mark didn't want her to come, but Conquest, oh, he loves it. He mocks Mark, saying how he always protects the weak. Pathetic in the mind of a Viltrumite. Eve tries trapping him in an energy bubble. He claps it out of existence. She creates armor and charges. He just laughs and makes her life worse. She attacks from every angle, even manages to hurt the old man a little, but nothing that stops him. When Conquest gets bored, he handles it the Viltrumite way, a brutal beating. He shatters Eve's armor, and for the grand finale, wrecks her face with a monstrous punch before running her through with one clean strike. And here's the irony. After demolishing her, Conquest actually laments that she was pretty. Viltrumites are a joke. Mark, broken inside and out, cradles Eve in his arms, begging her to hold on. He calls for Cecil, because if anyone can save her, it's him. Conquest, watching all this, seems impressed. Viltrumites don't get this kind of emotional bond. He even touches Eve's blood like some sort of blood sommelier and and ponders Mark's weird obsession with these simple beings. But he also warns Mark, Eve doesn't have much time. If he has something to say, it better be now. Too late. Mark's eyes burn with fury. Conquest grins, satisfied. He finally has Mark's full attention, and then he reflects. He's always had to hold back, but this time, he has free reign to destroy everything. Mark, consumed by rage, spits out his promise. Conquest won't live to see tomorrow. The Viltrumite laughs and taunts him, but he admits Mark's resolve is interesting. Mark, in a desperate move, throws everything he has into one punch. Problem? The impact is so intense it breaks his own hand. Fantastic strategy, but at least it destroys Conquest's robotic arm. Small progress. Conquest grabs Mark with his only arm and drops some life advice. Anger doesn't help. Mark, in sheer desperation, goes full caveman and bites him. Conquest doesn't even flinch and tosses him aside like a garbage bag. The fight rages on. Meanwhile, Eve starts glowing, and not in a happy way. A pink aura surrounds her. Something's happening. Mark, blinded by rage, keeps pummeling Conquest, demanding that he just die already. But he gets distracted when he notices Eve. Bad move. Conquest takes the opening and smashes Mark into the ground. And then, out of nowhere, he decides it's time for a therapy session. He talks about how he's always been alone, feared even by other Viltrumites, sent from planet to wipe out civilizations. And the worst part, he doesn't even have a real name, just Conquest. Like he's a tool, not a person. Mark, absolutely done with his villain monologue, responds dryly, just die already. But before things get any weirder, boom! A pink energy blast rips through the air. Eve, now fully engulfed in her power, unleashes a massive attack that torches Conquest. The Viltrumite, now looking like an overcooked rotisserie chicken, still has time for one last threat. This time, he's making sure Eve dies for real. Mark, beyond fed up, tells him he's not laying a finger on her and swings with everything he has. The issue? Conquest punches back and breaks Mark's arm and his hand. Mark gets the message. He's not strong enough to kill him, but who needs hands? He keeps attacking with headbutts because giving up is not an option. As he smashes the Viltrumite, he demands an answer. Conquest, in his last moment of defiance, admits that, honestly, that wasn't too bad. Mark finishes things in the most brutal way possible. The damage is so gruesome, it's not even worth showing what's left. Mark then drags himself to Eve, who is unconscious. Before passing out, she mutters, "I love you." Barely holding on, tells her he loves her too. Sometime later, at the Pentagon, Eve is by Mark's side trying to wake him up. He stirs, and the first thing he wants to know, how long was he out? Still groggy, he tries to piece together how he even got there. Eve asks if he remembers what happened. He does, including the part where she died. Eve corrects him. She almost died. It was close. Mark wants an explanation. Eve gives him the truth. The scientists who studied her powers before she was born placed mental blocks on her, limiting her abilities to avoid chaos. If she could alter matter freely, she'd basically be a god. But when she's on the brink of death, the block lifts and her powers go haywire. It's happened before, but she never told Mark. Because, well, hey, I'm basically a god isn't an easy conversation to slip into casual talk. Was it terrifying? Obviously. But in the end, it let her body completely rebuild itself. Mark admits that without her, he would have fallen into depression. The two embrace. Meanwhile, Sinclair is hard at work. Rebuilding bodies isn't exactly a walk in the park. He explains that they're developing new techniques, but the process still takes time. Cecil, not one for technical talk, cuts straight to the point. An old Viltrumite just tore Mark apart. If he could do that, how many more like him are out there? Sinclair already knows the stakes. That's why he promises to do better. Cecil leaves, and Sinclair, resigned, looks at his girlfriend and sighs. Guess date night's gonna have to wait. Meanwhile, Debbie visits Mark. Relieved, she tells him she's just happy he's alive. But in the middle of their conversation, she breaks down. She cries. She vents. When she married Nolan, she had no idea what she was signing up for. She never imagined the weight of the responsibilities that came with it. She remembers asking if Mark's powers had manifested yet. How disappointed he'd get when they didn't. Well, now he's got them, and no one has any clue what to do with that. And it's not like he's having a smooth ride. He just woke up and is already drowning in problems and battles. The full traumatized hero experience. Debbie wonders if she should have kept Mark away from this life. Maybe she shouldn't have let Nolan drill into his head that being a hero was a viable career path. But it's too late now. Mark, beaten to hell, still manages to mumble, "You were a good mom." Classic guilt trip line from a kid who knows he's stressing out his parents. But he has another question. Where's his brother? Short answer, down the hall. Long answer, doesn't really matter, because right then, Cecil walks in. Of course, he already knew Mark was awake. Spying and surveillance are basically his love language. Mark asks where Conquest is. Cecil doesn't sugarcoat it, dead. But Mark isn't one to take official statements at face value. He wants to see the body. ready. When he does, he finally exhales a little. That relief lasts about 5 minutes before he orders, "Burn that thing." But Cecil, being Cecil, isn't about to waste a Viltrumite corpse. That's prime research material. Meanwhile, Robot is having an existential crisis, mourning the team's losses. They've lost so many friends. There's so much work ahead. But the strangest thing, even in the middle of all this chaos, they still find time to stare into the void and reflect on life. In the end, isn't that what they're fighting for? Unprompted deep conversations no one asked for? If Rex were here, he'd tell Robot to shut up and get to the point. Rex was always blunt, always brave, a real example to follow, and now he's just gone. At the funeral, Robot makes a decision. He's taking Rex's name to keep his legacy alive. A touching tribute, but definitely a little bittersweet. Eve wants to say a few words. Amanda encourages her, but Rudy hesitates. This is new territory for him. If he'd been closer to Rex, maybe he'd be crying right now. Amanda gets it. She loves him. When they call for the new Rex, Samantha steps up. Rex was her first love. She tries to keep going, but the grief swallows her whole. Black Samson takes over as Mark walks up to Eve. She can't believe it. Rex, dead. It doesn't feel real. They hadn't spoken since moving into the tower. Time passes, and you think people will always be around, until they aren't. Rex had changed, matured. Maybe she should have spent more time with him. Mark understands. He feels the same. Despite everything, he really cared about Rex. It all happened so fast. Before he can say more, something unexpected, he smiles. Eve raises an eyebrow. He explains. He almost lost her not too long ago. He's just happy that didn't happen. Eve reacts the only way that makes sense. She hugs him and kisses him. Cut to home. Eve sneaks in through the window, enjoying the fact that, for once, both she and Mark aren't completely wrecked. And even though most of his bones are broken, well, you know, Mark tries to undress, fails miserably, and Eve, always the problem solver, uses her powers to lend a hand. You can guess the rest. Meanwhile, the city tries to move on, but in the sewers, a rat scurries by. Sequids. Oh yeah, they're still out there, taking over more civilians. Roose Livingston, radiating villain who thinks he's already won energy, says they're almost ready. All of this set to the sound of Nirvana, because nothing screams impending apocalypse like a 90s grunge classic. Out in space, Battle Beast is frozen, looking like some kind of twisted statue curled up in a fetal position. Then aliens appear to retrieve him. As soon as he wakes up, Battle Beast only has one question. When's the next fight? Meanwhile, scientists work on restoring Angstrom Levy. He thanks them for the upgrades, but they don't hold back. They remind him that his ambitions destroyed their world. Now, they're all stuck picking up the pieces. But then comes the big idea. The scientist hints that Angstrom might be the key to building a new home for them, a sanctuary in the wasteland. The real question is, does he even want to? As for Donald, he can't hold his tongue and asks Cecil if they're doing the right thing. Cecil gives the kind of response you'd expect from a corporate executive. We don't have a choice. And of course, the big reveal, Conquest is alive. The guy who was supposed to be dead is right there, recovering, while a 4,000-ton metal plate keeps him pinned down. Oh, and small detail, if he moves, the whole place goes boom. The plan? Once he wakes up, they'll squeeze every bit of intel out of him about the Viltrum Empire and how to take them down. Meanwhile, Oliver is finally getting discharged, but Mark's mind is elsewhere. He barely seems present. Oliver, full of youthful energy and heroism, insists he wants to help. More than that, he promises to follow Mark's orders without question. Finally, someone in this universe learned how to take direction. Mark, in turn, admits Oliver was right about the Viltrumites, about Angstrom, about everything. The battle nearly cost his mother's life, nearly cost Oliver's life, and Mark reaches a simple but brutal conclusion. If anyone threatens his family, or anyone he cares about, he won't hesitate. He'll kill. And just like that, Season 3 comes to an end. Or does it? Because somewhere deep in hell, Damien Darkblood is busy with his usual demon business. He chants a spell, and another demon appears, clearly annoyed at being summoned, like he had anything better to do in hell besides torment lost souls and maybe play poker with Lucifer. The other demon is already over it, pissed off that he's being disturbed so early. Damien, ever polite, apologizes for interrupting the guy's day off, but then drops a bombshell. There's someone on Earth strong enough to change the game, someone even more powerful than their king, and this being's heart completely consumed by darkness. Yep, Damien claims he's found a way to summon this entity and drag it straight into hell, because, you know, nothing nothing ever goes wrong when a demon decides to mess with cosmic-level evil. Now, real talk. Was this supposed to be a special? A bonus episode? A sneaky teaser? Because no one saw Damien Darkblood making a comeback? Well, technically not from the dead, but you get the idea. But here's the other weird thing. Rex's origin story. Are they dropping this as a short film? The first trailer hinted at it. First, we got Amanda. Now Rex is getting more spotlight. So the real question is, when the hell are we getting this Rex short? 7 weeks? A few months? During an eclipse just to make it extra dramatic? What we do know is that season 4 is still a year away, which means all we can do is wait, suffer, spiral into theories, and rewatch the previous seasons for the 100th time, hoping to catch some hidden clue. And while you're here, why not check out an awesome video about an animated series that defined an entire generation? Seriously, you don't want to miss this one.